right. Well, this is Ian Nethercutt with the Auto Hub show, and I have the illustrious privilege of interviewing an automotive entrepreneur slash retail expert who's been at it for I don't know how long. It looks like a while. Touched probably every area of the industry, from SaaS to retail to media. Was also managing stores, owning stores. So there's a whole range of stuff. It's a little hard to go over with an intro, but maybe you can give our listeners a little bit of a thought on sort of what your story is. Why'd you get into auto? Why did you pivot to technology and then back to auto? And, give us the story.
I was a restless child, Ian, like tumbling stone. I felt I got an auto. Believe it or not, I grew up in South Jersey. Both my neighbors were big retailers. One's FC Kerbeck, lived on one side, and the Miller family on the other, and stores in Carlisle and Hershey, Pennsylvania. So I grew up around the business, and you kind of never want to do what your parents do, I guess. So they always had cool cars. I mean, Lamborghinis, LMO2s, like Corvettes. Like I'm just fascinated by it. And like anything, cars are cool. I then cleaned cars and fixed cars and sold cars, and went through the retail side journey, which was awesome. Technology, I started selling cars in 1990, so like kind of think about timing. And by the time we got into these early, uh, you know, late 90s, mid 96 ish, the internet started, right? To actually say it's popped up its head, 94 5, but by six, it was kind of touching retail. And
Yeah.
I was fascinated by it. So I actually wrote the first book ever called Automotive Retailing on the Web. I still have a few copies around. But it was in a three-ring binder because there was no real publishing network back then. And I sold copies to OEMs. There weren't a lot of huge groups back then, but AutoNation was one. And I ended up doing a bunch of consulting as the internet younger guy of how to do process. And that kind of launched me then over to the SaaS side for a while, and then launched me back into retail, and then back here I am. I've been on the SaaS side for, oh gosh, now it's been probably over 15, 16, probably like close to 16 years back in the tech side. So
Interesting. Well, yeah, I actually, it's interesting you bring it up. I had a talk with a gentleman I used to work with a private sale company years ago. I built out some digital properties for them, both in prime and subprime for OEMs and dealers. And he just spent, I guess, 5 years in Malaysia, the Australia, New Zealand market. And he called me this morning and wanted, my thoughts on sort of where I thought retail was going and what I thought the challenges were in North America versus elsewhere in the world and all this kind of stuff. And I focused on a couple areas in the conversation, which kind of align a little bit with sort of your background, which is it was all about the customer experience from a point of view of phone calls way back. I
yeah,
mean, I started internet sales, I guess, before we had computers in the dealership. So we had a website, but we didn't really have computers. But eventually managed an internet department, and basically what ended up happening was it was just hard to accept for me personally how bad the numbers were. I was like, okay, these people like want to buy a car, the process is crappy. They're using the internet to try and figure that out. And that's still not great for a lot of stores. So, and the OEM is, beyond, I guess, beside themselves, aggravated by it. And then you fast forward, I guess, almost 15 years from there. And then what happens there is we have the same discussion. So now it's about AI, it's about digital retail, it's about why can't people get help? Why don't people like the experience? And I guess my question, looking at Active Engage as a company, looking at QuoreAi, looking at other things where really it was about touching that customer and converting more. What's your take on sort of where things are going with AI entering that
yeah.
versus back in the day when it was like, yeah, I have a website, sort of dealer.com or pick your thing, and there's capture forums. And that's sort of my thing, and a phone number, and maybe some photos.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. I think it's funny. There's somewhere in this house, there is, I still have a framed, it was featured in Automotive News. Maybe it's like 2000 or 1996. And I built one of the first websites for Capital Motor Group in North Florida. And there was no inventory. It was just a site with like a phone number and an email address and a little about us page and some real basic stuff, right? And look, I think a lot of times I look at where we're at today, and I think it's very easy to look backwards and connect dots. And as I look back, I found like websites existed. This digital retail thing came into play. It should not have existed. Websites should have evolved. They didn't. It allowed this wedge of this product to be created that well, people thought that consumers would self navigate, be able to select a car, get a payment, deal with their trade and valuation, deal with credit, all without speaking to someone. And in the end, that doesn't work. It didn't work then. It barely worked during COVID. And now dealers have just gone back. And I think you have to look at just any industry, and auto being one, where we have a lot of very deep embedded habits and processes. And humans in general don't like change. And dealers, all of us think like, man, I just get the customer in. That's all I care about. Get them in, I'll close them. That internet thing. Still think a lot of dealers look at the internet and like necessary evil, but I still just want to get people in my door. And I think a lot of the digital retail actually created a bad experience for the consumer because it set a high bar expectation for the people who sold digital retailing to the dealer of, wow, customers should just go through this. And it's sold a perception to the consumers that was not reality. So you kind of go through it. And then what happens? You walk in the store, in any store, and they're like, oh, forget what you did online. Let's start over. Like, what's your name? Let's write it out. Let's do your credit app. And you're like, well, I did that. And you're like, no, 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 that doesn't matter. Like, we
Yeah,
now need to see your car. Whatever you saw online for appraisal is no value. Like, it's that, to me, very disconnected experience. And I think it's one, our habits, our pay plans, all these things kind of dictate what happens. And then I think, and I think it's very true that when we look at new tech and come up with ideas, a lot of times we use old frameworks to install the tech or set the parameters of how that tech needs to operate. So we use like an outdated like model to try to build something new. And I think the one thing all the way fast forward to today, and I'll say in probably 2022, like AI woke up. Now it's still a baby, but it woke up with the real kind of leap in capabilities of LLMs and the ability for them to do math and other things, which were, I thought, would have been easier than language, but actually it's reverse. Language is much easier than mathematics. Um, I think that they woke up. I think it's going to not incrementally change. I think we're going to get like an exponent, like what do you call it, exponential kind of altering of things because AI behaves very different than SaaS software, right? Like it just doesn't operate the same way.
right.
And you can't put the square like AI into the round hole of traditional SaaS and dealership operations. And unfortunately, I think the lens everyone in our industry is looking at AI, casting it through the eyes of what's there, not erasing the board and going, hey, I think we need just a whiteboard approach and rethink everything. And I look outside our industry all the time. There's great examples where AI is becoming the center of the company, and it's replacing what we would consider core functionality inside companies. It's just getting eroded out as fast as the model can learn and improve.
Yeah, I mean, we did a show a while ago called the AI AIO show, and I had a discussion today about AI for auto. And actually, at NADA this year, there was many companies in AI. I've interviewed a number of them, and you probably know our buddy from Brain Trust, and he was
Yeah, Tim,
from from
Troy.
yeah from not Houston, from Austin, Texas, from Brain Trust, and he's always a big data piece person. And of course, there's Troy Shear and other people that I'm sure you know. But at the end of the day, AI by itself is not going to magically fix all the problems. It's task oriented, so you've got to do that. And I've been playing around with a new software called Clay that does some
Yeah,
interesting things with multiple pieces of software. The challenge is teaching people how to use it, not the software itself, but it's complicated. But as you look at this AI and sort of wiping the board, saying, "Okay, go back to the yellow page, white pages time frame." Then we sort of bolted on early websites, and I actually had a website company in 1996, and
oh wow, that's awesome.
people told me, "Hey, the yellow pages is going to be the thing. This, I don't know what this is. No one's going to want this." And I kind of laughed at them at the time. But you fast forward, and I worked for a website company in auto for about 3 years, and the vast majority of websites, even today, are based on WordPress, which is a platform that was built for bloggers in the early days of the internet. It's really not designed for modern website properties, so it's really kind of a bad framework,
Yeah,
kind of like basing your current supercomputer on DOS. I mean, it just
yeah,
doesn't make sense. So to me, when you look at the bolt-ons, be it digital retail, customer experience, website, and internal operations, AI could definitely clean that up and probably optimize a lot of it if you did it properly. But I guess the question I have is dealers' mindsets kind of like this, like they don't quite get
yeah,
the bigger picture. They're kind of like, yeah, 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 I want to sell cars. Okay, but how can I use this to do that? So I guess that's my question is when you're talking to dealers who may not be the most algorithm heavy analytical beings on planet Earth, how do you get them to say, hey, let's build an AI for us. Let's build
yeah,
something that makes sense for us. Like, how does that
yeah.
work?
Okay, so and I talk to myself, I talk to everyone about this, and what I look at is we are using AI like it's a thing, like it's over there. And we did the same with the internet, right? We said, I'm from the age, and I don't know if probably you as well, where we're like, we get on the internet to go look at something
Yeah,
because we think it's a thing.
yeah,
Yet AI is pervasive in every device we really touch today. We don't get on the internet anymore. My 14-year-old absolutely constantly makes fun of me. He's like, dude, what are you talking about? Like your device, you're just on it. Like you're not getting on it, you're already on it all the time. And I think this is a human thing. And I think, we see that new different thing, and now we have to classify it. And I think we're trying to classify AI as it's this thing that is going to come back over our existing workflows, do that. That is not what's going to happen. AI is going to be a pervasive like piece inside everything. It's already inside lots of things. AI has been around a long time. Not the AI we're seeing with LLMs and all the stuff with like Claude and Anthropic's amazing tool, or ChatGPT, OpenAI, or Perplexity. Like what we're seeing today is just the like
yeah,
kindergarten level of this stuff,
yeah,
right? And I think there's a point very soon that no one's going to say, "Oh, it's AI." It's just like it will just be a baked in piece of the tech, whatever the technology we're using. Like I do not see AI coming in and fixing traditional websites. I just see the traditional websites mostly disappearing because what will happen is, AI is driven by content and its ability to index and grab huge amounts of data. And I think what we'll see more is, and back to the centralized piece, is like having a data set of customers that the dealer actually owns. This is how I try to explain it, is like dealers need to own their own data. Rule one. Having your data co-located and owned between the DMS, CRM, some equity mining tool, and all these systems actually hurts the dealership because you have no cohesive look at a customer. So the first thing is banding all your data together. Now, you may say that's like a CDP, but CDPs to me are nothing more than like an organized database. I think you have to go beyond that, where you have to start thinking of it as a system of intelligence. Because let's be honest, Ian, do you care? Do you have 50,000 records in your system? No. What you care about, if you were a dealer and I was talking to you and I said, "Hey, and how many people are in your database?" And you go, 50,000. I say, cool. How many of them right now are in market looking to buy a car? And you go, you either have one of two answers. I have no idea, or 1 to 3%, right? Like you'll get the basics. Well, what happens if AI can tell you exactly it's these 1,209 people? Here they are. Here's what they can afford. Here's most likely what vehicle they'll buy, because all this data has been categorized and is real-time accessible for the AI to stitch together. Where data can't tell the whole story, AI is able to make the correlation that people just aren't good at. Like pattern matching, AI is just masterful at it, like far better than any human, I think, at this point. So I think what we're going to see is just right now we're still going to call it this thing, but then this thing's going to start eroding functionality we're doing inside the dealership, and it's going to erode more and more of it. And things like long-term follow-up on like systems of CRM. I just wrote this thing I thought was fascinating, which even was shocking to me, that email addresses in any system, 30% per year you lose because people change. How many dealers are even update, or how many CRMs or and DMSs update that stuff? None. So if you look at it and reverse that, you have about 2.5% of your database is like degrading monthly.
Expiring, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it's done.
and we talked about that today too,
Yeah.
because I got a call from my local Chrysler dealer. I happen to have a Chrysler vehicle. They called me because I got some event, I don't know. And I said, well, the vehicle's got 5,000 kilometers, which I guess about 3,000 miles or something like that. Not a lot. And it's a year old. Like, of all the people you could call,
You're the wrong one.
I'm not the one you should talk to. Like, not to say like you couldn't book a service appointment in for me. You might be able to do that, but it's not like that person doing that manual activity or even a CRM driven activity is saying, okay, before I make this call, here's the data. Here's the person when they bought it. Here's what Chrysler Financial says about it. Here's what the value is. Here's where, do they have a recall on the vehicle? Have they been in service recently? And that's what I was talking to this gentleman about this morning. Is I said, okay, if I'm making those bad calls anyway, not to say that I should be, but if I'm making those bad calls anyway, then I should be able to switch hit and say, oh, okay, you're not interested in sales. That makes sense. That's logical. Maybe I didn't know that, but service is a big thing. And I always use the comparison of cell phone companies, because cell phone companies have a major issue, which is that they want to sell more of these devices,
Right.
your device. But what they don't want to do is call and go, hey, I looked at your last 3 years of billing. I can save you some money.
Yeah, because at that point you're like, well, why didn't you call before? And why are you charging me that money? You open up a shopping window for them, which I don't think you want to do.
Yeah, like if someone called you on your car and said, listen, I took a look at your whole record. I took a look at how you bought cars for the last 10 years from our dealership. Thanks for the business, by the way. I looked at the usage of cars. I'm looking at, where you are in your current loan, what your vehicle value is. I'm convinced, based on that, you can share your information with me on what you'd like to get next, that this is a situation that could become reality for you. Is that something you're interested in, or are you just going to drive it for a few more years? I'm going to drive
Yeah.
for, okay, when's the last time you were in service? I was in service like 6 months ago. Okay, well, why don't we book your next appointment since I got you on the phone anyway? Be of help. And I think that's really what the evolution of customer experience could be if you increase the personalization, but more importantly, put that data together so that automaton, for lack of a better word, communicating with the customer has
Right.
something to say that's not a canned script. It's like, okay, here's the story based on the data. And I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
And that's the point where I think that's where AI just accelerates. I think it can bring the data, fill in the holes, start interpreting it, send things, see the behavior, make changes, do it again, and continuously improve with humans only as like the bumpers of a bowling alley. And I think what we're going to become for a while will be the guides of this technology, right? That's the new job. You're going to guide this technology as it learns and improves. And then the key to this is it always works, meaning like it always will make the call. It'll always send that email. It'll always text the customer. It'll always do the things once it's taught. It doesn't stop. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't forget. It doesn't have the mental thing like, I think I talked to Ian like 2 months ago. I don't want to call him again.
Yeah.
All that gets chucked out the window. And we create a just different process. And I think with data, you can time the interactions to the consumer that it's like, wow, you're calling me at the right time. But that only will happen when dealers organize their data. So to me, the first part of this journey is data aggregation, normalization, hygiene, and enhancement. That's layer one. And that has nothing to do with AI. This has to do with setting the data up that AI can leverage it. And the current data structure, all the monolithic architecture of the current CRMs, DMSs, they are not set up to really embrace the power of AI. The data structures aren't there. So they're going to have to figure out how to wire that in, and it's going to be really complex. Versus dealer owns his own data using, like, let's say, a graph database with vectoring that he can really then layer in technology to kind of, you know, take it to the next level. So my thinking is for a dealer, it's get your data in one spot, organized, enhanced, hygiene, normalized, and now say, okay, now you're going to start building a layer on top of it that's going to start doing things. And it can be little things. And it could be like, hey, I'm going to take everyone who's over 10 days out of the CRM marketing. And now I'm going to let AI just kind of look for opportunities and patterns amongst those people. Are they back online? Oh, I see they're back online. So they must still be in market. And let's see what other signals we can grab from third party sources. Let me aggregate this. Now let's reach out with this. And oh, that sort of worked, but didn't work exactly. So let's tweak it for the next customer. And let's tweak it again. Oh, this one worked. Okay, so let's do it again. It sort of worked. Oh, let's change it again. Okay, it worked again. And it will quickly disseminate these patterns of what works and doesn't. And time, it's like understanding like if you can see in your database of who's going to buy, meaning in market, they're showing signals, and you can collect thousands of signals, right? So, new homeowner, right, just had a baby, lease is done, take your pick. Like there's a multitude of signaling you can get access to. Once you have that, and then now you can look at your data and create cohorts so you kind of know what cars these customers will buy. And with third party data, you can know, hey, household income, household debt, affordability, which is a big thing right now. And so you could look in your database and go, wow, I have 1,018 customers who are actually showing all the signs that they're in market. And here are the cars they'll most likely buy. And now I want to match that to my inventory and focus on old age inventory first, right? So anything that's aging out, show them that first and then downstream. Because let's be honest, a salesperson would never do that. He's going to show the newest car that's out front, and
Yeah.
you're going to like, dude, I have the same car in the back. It's been sitting, 217 days, and you sold the one that's been in inventory 3, and it was the exact same setup. So this is where tech, to me, is just going to lay waste to some of these processes. And as I said, you're not going to come in and just lay AI into a dealership. What you're going to do is use the data and slowly take away things that nobody wanted to do anyway. Nobody wants to call the customer from 3 years from now who wasn't your customer. It's some orphan customer, but the CRM is saying call you because it's a linear process. Day, 972, call Ian. Like,
Yeah.
it is the worst. And the salespeople are like, skip. And that's why if you go into any CRM, there's like 10,000 uncompleted tasks. And if you go into like, it's funny, I think Vin capped their task at 2,000. Even though there'll be 10,000, it'll never show more than like 2,000. Because to me, it just shows the inefficiency of those tools.
So are you
Showing the
seeing,
tasks.
yeah, so are you seeing, new entrants like Techion, for example, or PBS or other people that are trying to sort of get into the game, Techion being the biggest gorilla? Are they the partners you're looking for to say, hey, you're changing the way CRM and digital retail and online buying and this and that and a bag of chips is all sort of cloud based? Are they looking at this, or is this something that they would bolt onto their system? I mean, like, who is your customer?
Yeah, look, our customers are dealers, groups, dealers that want to own their own data. I mean, at the end of the day, Techion has a long. Jay's building a great company, but he has a long journey ahead of him. That's a very complex thing. It's not taking on one business; it's taking on four businesses, right? You're taking on sales, F&I, service, parts. I like, and you have all this DMS to OEM connectivity. Like, and that's why it's very slow. I mean, he's raised a tremendous amount of money. He has 1,000 plus employees, whatever it is. How many stores does he have? He's nowhere near. He's still a flea on the rentals and CDK businesses. So, and he's been at it what, a decade. So,
Do you see
and
CDK like catching them, or what do you think?
look, CDK, this is the problem. You can't take like old architecture and then just shine it up. So businesses have to cannibalize yourself, and nobody wants to do that. Smart businesses will and can, but it's rare. So I'll give you like a great non-auto like example I look at was the Netflix Blockbuster, right? And
Yeah.
right. But this is a very interesting thing because and I saw the one of the two partners for Netflix. So when Blockbuster called, they were at their corporate retreat in Northern Cal by like Big Sur or something. They had whatever 100 and some employees at the time. They didn't even have time to go home, so they had to rent a jet and fly to Houston where Blockbuster was. And they one of the Reed had a Hastings had a Hawaiian shirt on and flip flops, and the other guy had a T-shirt on, and he was bummed because he felt at least Reed was better dressed with a Hawaiian shirt. At least he had buttons. So they get in the meeting and are talking, and uh, so Netflix has always believed that online alone was not the answer. It was going to be a combination of online in-store. That was the magic. And they pitched it that way. They said, we'll be the online, you're the in-store. This is like peanut butter and jelly. It's going to be great. And Blockbuster, they chewed it up. They loved it. They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So how much do you need? Or how much do you want for the business? So while they were flying there, Reed and him sat and they're like, well, what are we going to ask for? And they're like, well, we're 50 million in debt. So he's like, well, let's ask for 50 million. So they asked for 50 million. And he said this wall of Blockbuster people, he said he couldn't read them. They're just sat there. And he's like, what is going on with these guys? He's like, because he's like, I'm really good at reading a room. He's like, couldn't read this room. And he said he's looking. And then finally, he said after about a minute and a half, he's like, holy crap, these guys are trying not to laugh at us. And they're holding back laughter. They were literally holding back laughter, and that's why their faces look all contorted. And he's like, oh my God. So they leave, obviously brushed out. But that's only the beginning of that story. The real reality was they were still fighting. So Blockbuster says, hey, we're going to spin up a team. They don't get their A players, they get B players and say, hey, start thinking about this internet thing and start to try to do it. Didn't work very well. So they scrapped it. They put another B team together. Okay, put it at them again. Still nothing. And Netflix is growing. Blockbuster is kind of getting and then they had a regime change. Well, before the regime change, Blockbuster finally got it, and they took an A team and said, "Listen, get out of the building. Go down the block. You're going to be Blockbuster. You have nothing to do with us. Go do it. You're not under our scrutiny. Here's all the money. Go figure it out." And they started to figure it out. But but this is that crazy moment, inflection moment in business. As they're figuring it out, Netflix is like, "Holy crap, we're going to die." Because once Blockbuster figures it out and has the online and in store, they win. It is game over. And they're racing. And at that point, they had a regime change at Blockbuster. They fired the CEO. The new CEO comes in. The first thing he cuts is the online thing because he was a retailer. And he said, "No, we have to do more in store. We have to retail." And that was the end, and that was it. And but they came. The Netflix guy said 9 months they would have beat us.
Wow.
And I think when we look in our industry, right, to bring it all the way back to us in auto, CDK, Reynolds, they're all Blockbuster, right? And it'll probably be a new upstart that will go against that. Now, are they going to be smart and say, can we flip our platform over or what's going to happen? Because look, the scariest thing I also looked at with AI, and again, it's not a US thing, but you've heard of Klarna. Klarna
Yeah.
is that like, I don't know if you see it on websites like make payments instead of paying 900 bucks, make whatever, pay $30 a month for 7,000 months or whatever it is. It's a company from the Netherlands. So it's a big company. It's about $8 billion. And Klarna just announced that they're firing half their staff. So it's probably 2,500 people are getting let go. And in the Netherlands, that's a lot of people. They're getting rid of Salesforce, their whole CRM. They're getting rid of Monday, which is all their work planning, because over the last 2 years, they've been building AI applications on top of their data. I think that's a true canary in the coal mine. I think this is an example. We're trying to say, what is the next CDK? What is the next Reynolds? What happens if it's none of those? No, it's not even Techion. It's a completely different animal that we just haven't seen yet that replaces these systems.
So you think it's entirely possible that AI or a series of AI tools together could replace all this stuff
Oh,
and
yeah.
possibly at
Yeah.
the same time reduce the cost for the business?
Absolutely. So, what has limited us, if we actually get down to the granularity of it, is data movement. So I call them the four horses of the apocalypse, right? So we have, Reynolds, Cox, we have CDK, and Salerno has dealer socket and all, right, and all their tools. So they're the four. They have created amazing walled gardens that benefit and that they control the data. And then if you wanted access to the data, they charge vendors to get access to the data. So it's an extra way to get money from the dealer without directly getting money from the dealer. So to me, every car dealer, you have to think about it. It's like you order pizza twice, or you order pizza, like you pay for it twice, and then you don't get to pick the toppings and it gets it delivered. Because these vendors were genius because they're able to extract more money out of the dealer by forcing the vendor to pay for it, who the vendor increases their price to cover it, which is charged to the dealer. So they're able to, it's double dipping. Hands down, it's brilliant, but it's also obvious. For anyone who's like looking at it and you look in plain sight, you're like, this is a problem. And I think these AKA walled gardens will disappear. Now, they can disappear multiple ways. One, dealer starts to maintain ownership of their data. So now dealers can connect to tools themselves. They can even use non-automotive tools. They could use MailChimp, Pardot. They could use Salesforce. It wouldn't matter if they can control their data and put it into a system where they actually own it. I think once you look at that piece and you get your head around the data side, then the next side is it will spur a whole new world of vendors because they can just connect right to the dealer and the dealer's data. They don't have to go through this intermediary large company to access a very small amount of data. It's not like, if you do a certified integration, it's not like you get everything. You're not getting all the data. They still always hold back. And to me, I think the data is the most valuable thing a dealer has. To me, it's more valuable than the lot it sits on, the cars you have in inventory, even your people. Because when you get your hands around the data and you can actually turn it into something, yes. And I think AI it's built for that. It's a data consumption tool. That's what it does.
So what's your thought, or what's your advice to a dealer who says AI, there's too much of it, I don't get it, I don't understand it, I'm afraid of it. What should I do?
Forget AI. Just you have to run your business, right? So what's the most important thing? Your customers. I think we all agree that with no customers, no business, no business, no money, you go out of business, right? Or you sell your store. So the first thing is you got to figure out how do I get my customer data, protect my data, and keep it updated, because that's rule one. And to me, that's like I don't. This will date me, but I remember maybe it was like uh, 94. There was a book that came out called One-to-One Marketing. It was Sarah Peppers or Don Peppers and Sarah somebody. Do you remember that book?
Oh yeah.
It was called One-to-One Marketing. It was groundbreaking at the time. And I think it was like 94 it came out. And everything in that book is now more coming into reality, but it's 30 years later. It just took that long, right? But it was all about personalization. Like with AI, do you need a website? What happens if you send a customer a link and you have a URL and it dynamically creates all the stuff that's personalized for that consumer's experience? And then it has the components that it can repurpose them for different consumers and make changes. So I just see a world where dealers forget the tech, like get down to the brass tacks, get your data organized, and get your data streaming into one place that you control. Even if you're only putting it on maintenance today, the most basic, like, hey, I'm keeping it clean, you're going to start looking for ways to leverage it then. And that could be like long-term follow-up. You start taking pieces out of your infrastructure. And then you start saying, oh, I want to connect it to better tools. And you can do that. That is a much different path than we're on today. Meaning, like right now, dealers are dependent on Cox, CDK, and all bringing software to market for them. The problem is the market is moving so much faster than those large companies could produce to meet game winning. They are moving at an incremental process while we're seeing exponential change in tech. And that's why I said it'll be an outside in. And this is why even like Salesforce has only kicked the tires, Amazon kicks the tires, because I think people, well, they will wait. I mean, Salesforce just announced their Agent Force, which replaces Einstein, and it's like 100 times better than Einstein. Einstein wasn't that great, but it was okay. It was far better than anything in auto.
Right.
and but now Agent Force is 100x that, and it'll only get better. And that's the thing, like these systems, the only thing I always say about AI is once you get it doing something, it gets better so fast. And it's almost like you could take like a child who's one, and then next week you come back, he's like an eighth grader in knowledge. And then next week you come back, he has his PhD in mathematics. And you're like, what happened? How did that happen? And it's because that's what these systems are designed to do. I had read something the other day, which actually frightened me. It said that we're going to run out of data for these systems to crawl by 2032, meaning AI will have crawled everything. Because we're already seeing, if you look just globally, the amount of website activity is so high because you have AI crawling it all. And it's costing companies a fortune in cloud fees. And no one pays attention to it, but that's happening all day. And so they're going to use that data.
And what's your final thought? I mean, when you're looking at And I have this quadri today because it was kind of interesting. I don't talk to too many people who do work in Malaysia and New Zealand and different markets, and I've had this discussion actually on Monday. I did a show on the future of retail, which was kind of interesting just because I had a dealer who just unfortunately expanded his building. And I sat there and I went, I'm just curious as to the why. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. Like I'm not saying that. But it was kind of interesting because he happens to be a Honda dealer, and Honda on the Canadian side anyway. I don't They did a little bit on the US side, but they fired a volley or laid a landmine underneath the dealers and said, "Yeah, we're going to cut your margin on new cars by half. Have a good day." And of course, they're being sued by the dealers now. But I sat there and I said to him, I said, "Okay, if I'm a Honda dealer and maybe I own multiples, whatever, maybe I own a ton of stores, and I'm looking at the manufacturer turning the screws on, the amount of cars I'm going to get, what I can sell them for, how I have to sell them, all this stuff. If I were you, I'd be pivoting to the used car game pretty hard. Like I'd sell what I had to sell, but I wouldn't spend a lot of money on a fancy building. I'd be like, okay, like how low can I get my costs on the new car side so I can expand on used cars? And you're seeing Van and other companies, VinQ and other companies getting into that kind of market, as is obviously Carvana and Vroom, and then there's also these Clutch, and then Amazon seems to want to get into the new car market, which is kind of interesting. But
Well, it's
what do you
easier.
think on the size of dealerships? Do you think those are going to be?
Dealers are going to get bigger. They're not
They're
going
going
to
to
get
get
smaller.
bigger.
There's going to be less.
Interesting. Yeah. So some just
So
aren't going to
what?
make
Right. So what's going to happen, like anything, right? We're if we look over a very long period of time, we see like mostly continuous consolidation.
it.
I think now the top 150 stores in the U.S. own 4,400. I don't know. I tried to count, but let's say they own a quarter almost of all the stores between 150 groups. So, they're going to, I think the small stores in like Montana, like how do you survive when you can only sell 30 cars a month, 30 or 20, 15 new car or 15 new cars. I think the cost from the OEM perspective, it's going to be very hard to continue to let these organizations operate because the OEMs have to figure out how to be efficient in the market. So they're going to have to like pick key like places to be. And this is why I don't think there's a Lexus store in Montana. And it would make sense because Lexus is like, we can't put a store there. It will never pay for itself, and we'll never sell enough cars. So we're not going to do what Ford and Chevy did at the turn of the century, where there was 25 or 28,000 or 100,000 stores in the beginning, and then it is just eroded through time. But the problem is with OEMs where they'll demand a new facelift, you have to do it. I mean, you can put it off, but in the end, you're going to do it. And being a new car dealer to me has a massive competitive advantage to sell used cars because you have new car financing. You have way better credibility and capabilities than if you just had a used car flag. What Ernie's done at like Carvana is astounding. He was able to do what his dad did at Drive Time. He was able to really build a brand and kind of try to work against the traditional franchise dealer to do it. And I look at that and I was like, look, it's just smart business. And I think dealers can look at all of these as good examples of what to do, what not to do. And I think a lot of times many people they just live heads down in like my own operation. It's get out and look around. I think there's so many amazing learning lessons from other dealers, stores. And look, part of that, I'll say maybe gets done in 20 groups a little bit, but part of it is to me is that's massaged. I think the real stuff is get in your $1 million RV Prevost, drive around, visit stores.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds crazy as a dealer, like, why would I do that? Like, I have dealer friends. Yeah, visit stores, understand how they operate, and find things that you can bring back, but seeing it in real nature, not a curated view of a 20 group when it's being presented. Like, actually see if that is really what's happening. Because a lot of times, again, in our industry, I think people paint pictures of things that just aren't actually accurate. That's the
100%.
nicest way to say it, you know? Just
100%. I
it's
mean,
yeah.
I had the
Oh, it's
option
like
to work with, 68 stores when I
yeah,
worked with Nissan, and there was one group that just they killed in the markets they're in. And I remember visiting the stores outside of them in those same markets, and they'd be like, "Oh, these guys, you're being preferential to these guys, and you're not doing this." And I said, "Have you been in their stores?" They said, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, you're in the city, dude. Like these guys, I mean, they know what they're doing. It's not success by accident. It's
no,
they have a process, they run it every time, they get better every year, they invest in their people, they grow their brand, they grow their offering, they dominate the market, and you guys really just can't plead like, "Oh, help me." No, you can't do that. That's not what business is. And I think that's the biggest challenge for the smaller groups today versus the larger ones is the larger ones keep getting bigger and they get that much tighter. The smaller groups, they don't have as many options because they just don't have the capital and the drive to do it in a lot of cases. Even though there are examples like Rob Ruth Ford's a good example where he's been able to do it on the used car side. And I think there's been other examples like H. Gregg is a good example that has location in the Canadian market
absolutely.
and in Florida. And they're like, yeah, let's just build a whole bunch of used car stores.
Yeah,
And I think
listen,
it was
John's done
smart.
good. John's
Yeah.
done great, but he's also slamming new car in
Yeah.
strategically
Yep.
because it feeds itself, and he's able to do that. And look, in the end, I think this business is not going to get easier,
No.
right? So I think once you kind of like that sinks into your heart, and you're like, this is going to be a fight. So how am I going to fight to win? And to me, it's always going to begin with data. It doesn't begin with tech. It begins with data. And then it's like, okay, what are my processes? What do I want to accomplish over the next 6 to 12 months as a business? Forget like because a lot of times dealerships are on a like a 30-day calendar cycle, right? We think 30 days is like, dude, first of the month, it's like, okay, what's our next month? And there's no projecting like as a business, what are we really going to do over the next 6, 12 months, maybe 18 months. And that would be, for a well-established business, they can kind of start thinking about deeply forecasting the business growth, right? And it's like, okay, we need to grow service by 20% over the next 18 months. Okay, now I need to take that and now I need to go backwards. How we're here today, how do we get to a 20% growth? What are we going to do? What are we going to try? What are we going to experiment with? What are we going to consider what I call I always say there's two types of decisions in the world that there are one-way door decisions and two-way door decisions. One way is you step through it, the door shuts, disappears, and you're like, damn it, did I step onto the right? Am I on the right place? And I think, but you only want to make one door decisions a few times a year, probably less than five. You're making it's like the full commit. And then you'll make hundreds of two-way decisions. Hey, we'll try this for 60 days. After that, we're going to measure, we're going to come back, and now we're either tweaking, terminating, or putting gas on it. And I don't see that level in many stores taking that discipline to just hold like in Braveheart, right? Hold until it's they're just like, no, it's not working. Abandon, change, and you don't even know what you're changing. And I think you always have, like in science, you always have a baseline and you build off the baseline. And I think really good businesses, forget auto, really good businesses do that. They build up off of they have a baseline. This is my known. I'm going to build out from there. And look, some stores are amazingly run, but out of 17,000 stores, 17,000 stores are not amazingly run.
Well, I mean, I use always the example of Beaver Toyota, and they were
Yeah,
the first, I think they were the first Toyota store to sell 400 used cars in a month or something stupid like that.
some crazy number. Yeah.
And I talked to and I talked to dealers about this, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I got to get into used cars." I'm like, "Okay, well, how many do you sell?" "Well, I sell 50." I'm like, "Okay, well, here's an example of 400, but don't chase the 400. Like put it. They started at 100, and over time, exactly like you said, they said, "Okay, how do we sell 200? And then how do
Yeah,
we sell
because
300?
it's a
And then
different
how do we sell
business.
400?
Yeah.
How much inventory do we need?" How about what process do we need in place? What's our RICO got to be? How many photos do we got to have? How much advertising? I mean, they're put the pieces together by looking at where they are and where they want to be and building it over time. And that's
Yeah.
how you get it done, right?
That's exactly. I always go back to when we had the CRM business. It's so crazy. Every time we installed a new CRM, dealer would come and say, "Hey Todd, uh, who's your best dealer?" And I'd be like, being user of the system, I'd say this one. He goes, "Okay, I want his follow-up plan." And I'm like, "No, you don't." He's like, "No, no, no, I do. I really want that plan."
Yeah.
And I was like, "It doesn't work like that. He's been at it for years. He is not you. You're not
On this
nothing."
market,
I
yeah.
said, "If you take his plan and put it in your store, you are going to fast track to failure because you haven't built." It would be like walking in the gym and some skinny guy and there's a bodybuilder and you're like, I want to work out. I want to work out like his workout. And you're like, what are you talking about? You'll die. That guy benches freaking 400 pounds. You can't pick up 100. What are you talking about? The bar will kill you. It'll break you all your everything. I can't squat 500 pounds like this dude. And I think it's that understanding we want to fast track our way. And
Yeah.
we just think, oh, we'll plug in what the best guys do. No, the only competition a dealer should focus on is himself.
Yeah.
And I know it's crazy to think because it's so contrarian to how everyone runs dealerships. But I truly believe if you really want to be the best, the biggest, look inward and say, hey, man, this is where we're at today. We want to grow, as you said, we're at 50. Let's get to 100. What is it going to take to double our used car business in the next whatever, 180 days? How are we going to do that? How many more cars do we need to buy? What type of advertising? How are we going to buy cars off the street? How are we going to go after private party? How are we going to change our marketing that's going to drive the traffic that's going to help us acquire more cars and then sell more cars, right? Because our business is a supply chain business. Like new cars, yes, flow in. Used cars, you're horse trading everywhere. You're not going to live off auctions. You got to be able to do it through trades or acquisition. And I think a lot of times they're just like, nobody has a plan. They're just like, sell more, close that guy, roar. And you're like, it doesn't work like that. I think a lot of times you have to do a lot of inward soul searching and building plans, which take time to map all that out. And it doesn't happen in 30 days. You grow muscle over time. But as you grow muscle, you get smarter, you get stronger, you learn. And to me, that just makes you a better competitor as you do it. And as I said, dealers who do that, they'll win. They'll stay at it.
Yeah. I mean, I interviewed, I think it was the top back when I sold cars or right after I think it was right when I sold cars or right after. Anyway, I interviewed one of the top, I think he's the top Honda salesman in the country I live in Winnipeg. I think he's where he's at. Anyway, the store sells, I think, 200 new cars a month. It's not a huge town, whatever. He sells half of them. So and of course everybody who works there on the management level doesn't want anyone talking to him because like they're worried about it. And I said to him, I said, like, great, you sell 100 cars a month. How do you do that? But more importantly, how did you get there? Like, so let's just say you started 8 to 12 and then you were 25. Like, how did you get to 100? And to your point, he built his team much like a real estate team. He's got a guy who appraises cars. He's pre-selling the trade-ins. He's got because he's selling a lot of cars every day. And he isn't successful by accident, but also when I look at Beaverton as a market, which is near Nike's headquarters in Oregon, I went and I was doing some training years ago when I worked for Dealer Facts and we trained their system. And they have a massive service department. Like I think the biggest Toyota service department I've ever seen. I think they had 60 service bays plus quick service. And they have a massive retention of their customers. Like they had cars that had been bought there 20 years ago still being serviced there. But
Wow.
the thing that was interesting wasn't that. Their system for selling cars was also very revolutionary. But if you go in the same town I happen to visit a Hyundai store in the same town. So I went on the lot and I was, basically testing them out. I said, okay, I want to buy this. I don't know what the Palisade, I think was their big vehicle at the time. So I went into the show. Do you have it? Okay, how much does it cost? Oh, I don't do the numbers. I have someone who does that. I'm like,
Just
There's a Toyota store like
yeah,
across the
no
street.
credibility. You just
There's
literally suck all the credibility of that person. Like,
there's a
why can't I
Toyota
talk to
store
them?
across the street that could do it on your at your desk with the salesman, and they'll even send you home with the like an app or something that you can configure it like within 20 minutes. Like they'll do it quickly. Like you don't even have to drive. They don't even care. They're just selling volume. But it was like, to your point, if I'm not looking at the dealerships around where I am, the tools aside, if I'm not even comparing myself to the people within 20 miles, and they're beating me that badly, like I don't know, I think I'd be studying, the other dealers. And the funny thing, when I go back to this Honda story, was I talked to him and I said, so the salesman on the other side selling 8 to 12, do they even talk to you? He goes, no. They're intimidated by the guy. But I'm sitting there going, hey, I got a guy in my store selling 100 a month. I'm going to be going like this, learning how he did that. I mean, that's a massive number,
I'm
right?
gonna be
Right.
walking in with coffee every day to
Yeah.
him and sitting just by his desk listening, because I think that $6 investment in learning daily would throw spades in the end.
Oh, yeah. But I appreciate the time. If it's core.ai, or is it coreai.com?
It's coreai.com, but I also own core.ai.
I figured.
But you know me, marketing guy. I
Yeah.
have to live with the whole core. So, yep.
Yeah. And then how can they get more details on what core does? Like, how would someone do that?
Easy. You can visit our website, which is QuoreAi.com. They could go to LinkedIn. I publish lots of content, give away tons of stuff for free. Everything
Yeah.
around identity verification. We do, credit, secure messaging, and obviously a lot of work in data. So
Rock and roll. Well, I appreciate the time today. And it's good to hear about the history of the internet, I guess you could call it, or the history of the car business. And
yeah,
shockingly, that store, I mean, the first thing they did when you talked about pricing is they brought out the Foursquare, which I thought was even funnier. But the
I,
funniest thing about that experience, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Oregon market, but the number one import vehicle in that market is Subaru.
okay.
So if you're selling anything, you need to know Subaru, because like everyone's gonna ask you. Like I'm looking at a Subaru and I'm looking at Toyota or whatever. So I'm sitting there and I'm trying to get a lease quote, and there's a young lady with her husband and I think their mother, and the salesman's fighting them over Subaru versus Hyundai, and I was like,
Right.
bad battle, just not a good battle.
And listen, I'll tell you, I've seen smart dealers go buy competitive cars,
Yeah.
have them in the back, and then force their team to learn about those cars to sell against them.
Oh
That
yeah,
to me, that's being like super smart. Like, hey, I understand this is a competitive car. I need to sit in. I know they have advantages. How am I going to position us in a conversation against that? You can't just say it's better. Ours is cheaper. I'll give you more on your trade. Like, those are terrible answers. Like, you really need to be able to get in and say, listen, Subaru makes a great product, hands down. Here's an advantage of this Hyundai versus the Subaru Outback, if you're trying to compare. Like, but here's something cool about Subaru, but here's something amazing. That education, the consumer builds trust, builds relationship. And to me, I'm still a true believer that people sell cars, not
yep,
tech.
yep.
And even AI, today AI is going to be a helper in the back, a co-pilot, but it's still the human connection that is driving sales. So
Yeah, I mean, there was a Honda dealer in this market where I live now. I don't know if they still do this. So what they do is, let's just say it's an Accord. They would buy a Camry and whatever the decent product is. What is that? Not Ultima. I think it's Ultima. Anyway, those three, and then the CRV, same thing, and whatever. And then they say, "Oh yeah, drive it. Here you go. Here's our car. Here's a plate. Go drive it." And they'd have people driving them back to back, and that builds a lot of credibility. And they were selling a lot of vehicles because people were like, "Oh, I don't really need to go look at Toyota because I drove it here. And,
yeah, it's a brand
why
new
am I
one.
going anywhere else? There's no point in doing that. Like that's what I was
Yeah,
gonna."
I took away that I need to go to the Honda store, and
Hmm.
like, here it is. Here's a brand new one. Look, it still has a tag on it. It's
Yeah,
2024. That's a small investment for the dealer to have those cars, especially when they feel like they're in like a tight battle market, like, oh, Ford F-150 versus Silverado, right? Like those matchups, or Dodge Ram, like those matchups to me are super critical. Like dealer needs to, help your sales team to me by giving them the training and empowerment to sell. And that's, now I feel like a lot of sales, they're not the salespeople of before. I don't know if it's the training that's lacking. I don't know if everyone's just been crushing grosses and nobody had to sell over the last couple of years. I don't know what it is, but I walked into a Subaru store with my buddy and he buying a car. So we're in there. Sales guy knew nothing about the car, nothing. And I'm not going to say that's everywhere, but he knew nothing. And it was funny because then here comes this other guy, Bill, the sales other guy, and our sales guy asked Bill, "Hey, Bill, what about this?" Bill's like, blah, 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 blah. Bill knew everything about the car. And then we went on the test drive. This will make you laugh. So in the center of the Subaru we're in, it had this little slot. It looked like where you would plug in like an iPhone or something, right? And I'm like, what is that? And we're all looking, and sales guy's like, I don't know, that maybe that's a plug. So we're like, me and my buddy are looking, and we're like, I don't think that's a plug. So we get back, our guy's working numbers. Bill, the knowledgeable guy, walks by, and we're like, yo, hey, we have a question. In the center, there's this little thing. He goes, oh, let me tell you about that, guys. That is the cabin air indicator, looking at the cabin air quality, and it's a filter. And I was like, what? He goes, yes, this is how it works. And we're like, oh my God. So my buddy didn't buy the car, but it was very interesting that like we both walked out and said, I wish we had Bill. Like, I think he would have maybe bought a car, but we definitely weren't buying it from a person who had no knowledge and honestly didn't care. It was like he was doing us a favor, taking us out. You really want to drive it, and do you have to drive it? Like,
No, I'm just gonna buy it.
I'm just gonna plop down $47,000, but no, I don't want to drive it. You're right. What am I thinking?
Get into my car. I got a briefcase. I'll make it happen for you.
Super funny, man.
Well, I mean, when I used to sell Hondas, that was when hybrids were kind of a big deal, and I took it upon myself to learn about them, even though I didn't always sell them, but people come in, they ask. And virtually all the salesmen hated selling them because they had to know something, and they didn't want to know. They just want to sell Civic. They don't really care. Like hybrid, who cares? Like those people are weird. I don't want to talk to them. And I remember going back years later, and I was just in the showroom, and the customer came in, and I hadn't worked there for years, and they said, "Oh yeah, I'm looking at a hybrid." He goes, "Oh, we used to have a guy who worked here who knew about that car. He doesn't work here anymore, though." And I was physically there. It was really, really funny.
That's funny. You're like,
yeah, I'm not gonna say that.
Yeah, that's awesome, though.
Yeah, know your product. That's like tip 1, know your product. Tip 2, know your competitive product. Tip 3, maybe have some information. I don't know. Call me crazy.
I know what I'm friends with BJ Fogg. He's like a Stanford leading behavioral psychologist.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Tiny Habits, but super nice guy. I've spent time with him, and BJ's always like, Todd, you overcomplicate everything. He said, help people do what they're already trying to do, and then make it as easy as possible. He goes, 2 rules, dude. Stop building these Miro freaking super charts. Like, help them do what they wanted already trying to do. So don't try to change behavior. Just get in line with what they're trying to do and make it just dumb, simple, easy for them to execute on that.
But anyway, thanks for the time. Have yourself a great day.
Thank you.
And I
will enjoy your weekend.
We'll get it done.
Okay. Have a great one. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.